The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the quiet of the living room as Sylvester sat at his desk, staring blankly at the screen. His fingers idly clicked through tabs, landing on the stories he'd been reading for the past few nights. They all had the same theme: betrayal, infidelity, secrets. And each one seemed to pull him in deeper, making him question things he never used to worry about. Kelly's laughter echoed from the kitchen as she prepared dinner. The kids were upstairs, probably watching TV or finishing their homework. It was just another ordinary evening in their home, or at least, it should have been. He closed the browser tab, feeling the familiar twist in his gut that had become too common recently. Am I overreacting? He thought. Kelly had never given him any reason not to trust her. She was always loving, always caring. But after reading countless stories of cheating spouses, he found himself second-guessing everything. He pushed his chair back and walked into the kitchen. Kelly stood by the stove, stirring something that smelled like chicken. Her blonde hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and she wore a soft smile, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "Smells good," Sylvester said, leaning against the doorframe. "Thanks, babe. Should be ready in about 10 minutes, Kelly replied, glancing over her shoulder with a warm smile. There it was again, that familiar feeling of unease. He couldn't shake it. It wasn't what she said or did. It was just there, in the pit of his stomach. He decided to push the thought away, like he'd been doing for the past few weeks. But as he watched her move around the kitchen, something nagged at him. Later that evening, after the kids were tucked in, Sylvester found himself on the couch next to Kelly. She was scrolling through her phone, probably catching up on emails or checking social media. He glanced at her screen, trying to be subtle. "Is everything okay?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. Yeah, just thinking," he replied, a bit too quickly. Kelly paused, locking her phone and turning to face him. "You've been acting weird lately. What's on your mind?" Sylvester hesitated. He didn't want to sound paranoid, but the thoughts were swirling in his head. The stories he read, the signs he imagined, none of it added up, but it was enough to make him question. "I've just been reading some stuff online, stories about marriages and people cheating. It's been making me think about things. About us," Sylvester admitted, trying to sound casual. Kelly frowned. "Why are you reading that kind of stuff? It's all just drama and made-up stories." I know, but it gets in your head, you know? Makes you wonder if, I don't know, if things are as perfect as they seem." Kelly looked at him, her blue eyes softening with concern. "Are you saying you don't trust me?" Sylvester quickly shook his head. No, that's not it. It's just, you hear about all these people who never thought it would happen to them, and then it does. I don't want to be one of those people who misses the signs." She sighed and leaned back, crossing her arms. "So now you're looking for signs? Sly, we've been married for years. We have 2 beautiful kids. Don't you think I would tell you if something was wrong?" "I know you would," he said, feeling a little embarrassed now. "It's just, I don't know. It's stupid." Kelly's face softened, and she reached out to touch his arm. "Look, if something was wrong, I'd tell you. But you can't let some random stories online get in your head like this. We're fine, you're fine, stop worrying." Sylvester nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, you're right." But as Kelly leaned in to kiss him on the cheek and turned back to her phone, the doubt lingered. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was overthinking it. But once the seed of suspicion is planted, it doesn't take much for it to grow. And Sylvester had a feeling this was just the beginning. Later that night, as Sylvester lay in bed next to Kelly, the hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. The stories, the paranoia. It was getting to him. He had no real reason to distrust Kelly, but the feeling wouldn't go away. He rolled over, glancing at her sleeping face. Peaceful. Innocent. Or was she? The doubt crept in again, and Sylvester closed his eyes, willing the thoughts to go away. Tomorrow would be better, he told himself. Tomorrow, he would stop reading those stories. Tomorrow, he would trust her. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be that easy. The days seemed to pass in a blur for Sylvester, but the gnawing feeling in his chest grew stronger with each passing hour. It had started as a small doubt, a harmless curiosity sparked by those stories he'd read online, but now it was consuming him. Every move Kelly made felt like it had a hidden meaning. Every interaction left him questioning what he couldn't see. Sylvester tried to shake it off. He told himself repeatedly that it was just his imagination, that his wife was loyal, that they had built a life together. But once the shadows of suspicion crept in, they were hard to ignore. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Sylvester came home to find Kelly sitting at the kitchen table, her phone clutched in her hand. She was laughing too hard, he thought, and quickly locked her phone the moment he walked in. "Hey," Sylvester greeted, forcing a smile. Kelly looked up, her smile fading just a bit. "Hey, babe, how was work?" "Same old," he replied, walking over to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. His eyes couldn't help but dart toward her phone. "What's so funny?" "Oh, nothing," she replied with a wave of her hand, her laughter now a memory. "Just chatting with Todd. You know how he is, always sending those ridiculous memes." His heart skipped a beat at the mention of Todd. Her brother-in-law, he reminded himself. It's nothing. But still, something about the way she said it made him uneasy. "Oh, Todd, huh?" Sylvester said, leaning against the counter and trying to keep his tone light. "You two talk a lot these days." Kelly shrugged, seemingly unbothered. "Yeah, I mean, we've always been close, you know that. He's going through some stuff with his job and he likes to vent." Sylvester nodded, but the words stung. Always been close. He didn't remember them being that close before. Not like this. "Is that all you guys talk about?" "His job?" Sylvester asked, a little more pointedly than he intended. Kelly raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in his tone. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sylvester hesitated, his mind racing. Should he push this? Should he just let it go? He didn't want to sound like the paranoid husband who made accusations based on nothing. But still, the doubts gnawed at him. "Nothing," he muttered, turning away. "Just curious." Kelly didn't say anything for a moment, and the silence between them thickened. "You've been acting weird lately," she finally said, her voice softer now. "Is something going on?" Sylvester forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "Weird? No, I'm fine. Just tired, that's all." But she didn't look convinced. She stood up, moving toward him, and placed a hand on his arm. "Come on, Sly. Talk to me. You've been distant, and now you're giving me the third degree about Todd. What's going on in that head of yours?" He wanted to tell her. He wanted to explain the creeping thoughts that had taken root in his mind. But how could he, without sounding crazy? "It's nothing," he said again, pulling away from her touch. I've been thinking a lot. You know, about us, about how things have changed." Kelly crossed her arms, her expression shifting from concern to frustration. "Changed? What do you mean?" "We're fine, Sylvester. I don't understand why you're acting like this." "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I just feel like something's off. Like you're hiding something from me." The words hung in the air between them, and Sylvester immediately regretted saying them. Kelly's face fell, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Hiding something?" she repeated. "Sly, what the hell are you talking about?" He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "Forget it. I'm probably just overthinking." But Kelly wasn't going to let it go that easily. "No, I'm not going to forget it. If you're accusing me of something, say it. Don't dance around it." "I'm not accusing you," Sylvester sighed. I don't know. Ever since I started reading those stupid stories online, I've been second-guessing everything. I see you with Todd, and I don't know, it just gets to me. Kelly's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious right now? You're getting jealous of Todd? My brother-in-law? Sly, this is ridiculous. Maybe it is, he said quietly, but I can't help how I feel. Kelly shook her head, stepping back. You're letting this paranoia get to you. Todd's family, for God's sake. We've always been close, and now you're acting like there's something going on between us? That's insane. Maybe, Sylvester muttered, but he still couldn't shake the image of her laughing at Todd's messages, the way her face lit up when she talked about him. It felt wrong, even if it was all in his head. Kelly threw her hands up in frustration. I don't know what to say to you. If you don't trust me, if you don't trust Todd, then what are we even doing here? It's not that I don't trust you, Sylvester said, trying to backtrack. Just what? Kelly interrupted, her voice rising. You're making up problems that don't exist. You're reading crap online, and now you're looking for something to be wrong. Well, guess what? There's nothing wrong, except for whatever is going on with you. Sylvester stood in silence, feeling the weight of her words press down on him. Was he really the one creating problems where none existed? Was this all in his head? I don't want to fight about this, Kelly said after a long pause, her voice softer again. I love you, Sly. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I'm not doing anything wrong. And Todd, he's just family. That's all. Sylvester nodded, but the doubt still lingered. I know, I'll try to let it go. Kelly gave him a long, searching look before finally nodding. Good, because we have too much to lose over something that's not even real. As she turned and left the kitchen, Sylvester stood there, the uneasy feeling still gnawing at him. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to let it go. But the shadows of suspicion had already taken root, and no matter how hard he tried to ignore them, they seemed to grow a little darker each day. The night it happened, everything felt strangely quiet. Sylvester had worked late and, as usual, arrived home around midnight. He expected the house to be dark, Kelly and the kids already asleep. It was the routine he'd come to know, the comfort of familiarity. But something felt different as he pulled into the driveway. The lights in the living room were still on. He sat in his car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. Why are the lights on? He wondered. A sense of unease washed over him, but he pushed it aside. Maybe Kelly had fallen asleep on the couch, or maybe she'd stayed up watching TV. Nothing unusual. Relax, he told himself. Don't jump to conclusions. But as he approached the front door, he noticed something else. A car parked a few houses down. Todd's car. Sylvester froze, his breath catching in his throat. His suspicions, which he'd been trying so hard to push aside, rushed back all at once. He stared at the car, his mind racing. What is Todd doing here at this time of night? His chest tightened, and every step toward the door felt heavier than the last. He quietly unlocked the door and stepped inside, his senses heightened. The living room was empty, but faint voices floated down the hall from their bedroom. He could hear Kelly's voice, muffled but unmistakable, and Todd's. The air seemed to thicken around him, every sound amplifying as his worst fears took shape. He could hear laughter, low and intimate. Sylvester's body moved on autopilot, his legs carrying him toward the bedroom, his mind racing through a whirlwind of denial and dread. As he reached the doorway, he stopped, his hand trembling on the door handle. Do I really want to see this? He thought. A part of him hoped that he was wrong, that the voices he heard weren't what he thought they were. But deep down, he already knew. Taking a deep breath, Sylvester pushed open the door. There they were, Kelly and Todd, his wife and his brother-in-law, lying together in his bed. Time seemed to stop for a moment, the world narrowing to the single image in front of him. Kelly's face turned toward him, her expression frozen in shock, her skin pale against the dim light. Todd scrambled, trying to pull up his pants, but it was too late. They had been caught. Sly, Kelly began, her voice trembling. But Sylvester couldn't speak. He stood there, his hands shaking, his chest tight with the rage and betrayal that surged through him. He had imagined this moment so many times in his darkest thoughts, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. "What the hell is this?" Sylvester finally managed, his voice low and dangerous. Kelly sat up, pulling the sheets around herself, her face pale. "It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" Sylvester repeated, his voice rising. "Then tell me, Kelly. Tell me what the hell this is." Todd stood by the bed, fumbling with his clothes. He looked at Sylvester but said nothing, his face flushed with shame. The room was thick with silence, the tension so heavy it was hard to breathe. Kelly stood up, wrapping the sheet around her body. "Sly, please, just listen. I can explain." "Explain?" Sylvester's voice was sharp, cutting through the room like a knife. "You want to explain this? After all the lies? After you told me there was nothing going on, that I was just being paranoid? This is how you explain it?" Kelly's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Sylvester laughed bitterly, taking a step closer. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. This is betrayal. This is you lying to me over and over while you've been sneaking around with him." Todd finally spoke, his voice quiet and shaky. "Sly, man, I'm sorry. It just happened. We didn't mean—" "Shut up!" Sylvester snapped, his eyes blazing as he turned to Todd. "You don't get to talk. You're my brother-in-law, for God's sake. And this is how you repay me? In my house? In my bed?" Todd looked down, shame and guilt written all over his face, but Sylvester wasn't finished. He turned back to Kelly, his voice trembling with a mixture of pain and fury. "How long, Kelly? How long has this been going on?" Kelly swallowed hard, her tears now streaming down her face. "I don't know. A few months." "A few months?" Sylvester repeated, feeling like the floor was falling out from beneath him. "And you've been lying to my face this whole time?" "I didn't want to hurt you," Kelly sobbed. I didn't know how to stop it." "You didn't want to hurt me." Sylvester's voice broke, the pain finally cracking through the anger. "You've already destroyed me, Kelly. Everything we built, everything we were. It's all gone." He turned toward the door, his vision blurring with tears he didn't want to shed. I can't do this." "Sly, wait!" Kelly cried, reaching out toward him. "Please, we can fix this. It was a mistake. I love you." Sylvester froze in the doorway, his back to her. He wanted to believe her. A part of him still clung to the hope that things could go back to the way they were, but the image of her with Todd, the betrayal, was burned into his mind. He couldn't unsee it. He couldn't forgive it. Without another word, he walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The echo of the door reverberated through the empty house, a final, bitter punctuation to the life he thought he knew. As he stormed out of the house and into the night, Sylvester felt the weight of everything he had lost pressing down on him. His marriage, his trust, his family, all shattered in one brutal moment. The cold night air hit his face, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning inside him. The shadows of suspicion had been right all along, and now they had become his reality. Sylvester sat at the edge of the bed in a cheap motel room, staring blankly at the faded wallpaper. The events of the previous night played over and over in his mind like a broken record. He felt numb, his anger, heartbreak, and confusion all tangled into one heavy knot in his chest. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He didn't have to look to know who it was. Kelly had been calling non-stop since he'd walked out the night before, her messages pinging relentlessly, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. What was there to say? What could possibly be said after what she'd done? Still, part of him itched for answers, for closure. He reached for the phone and scrolled through the dozens of messages, his thumb hovering over the most recent one. "We need to talk. Please, Sly. Just once." he sighed, rubbing his tired eyes, and before he could stop himself, he pressed call. It rang twice before Kelly's voice came through, quiet and strained. Sly? Yeah, Sylvester said, his voice flat. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. He could hear her breathing, hear the weight of her regret in the pause. Sly, I'm so sorry, she began, her voice breaking. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Sylvester clenched his jaw, his emotions still too raw. So why did it? Why didn't you stop it? I don't know. Kelly's voice wavered, filled with guilt. It just happened. It just happened? Sylvester repeated bitterly. You're really going to sit there and say this was some kind of accident? You've been sneaking around with Todd for months, Kelly. That's not something that just happens. I know, she sobbed. I'm not trying to make excuses, Sly. I'm trying to explain. Then explain, Sylvester snapped. Explain to me how you could betray me like this. How you could look me in the eyes every day, sleep next to me every night, while you were doing this behind my back. Kelly was quiet for a long time, her breath shaky. When she spoke again, her words hit him like a punch to the gut. I did it to get back at you, she whispered. Sylvester's heart stopped. What? I did it because of what you did to Kimberly, Kelly continued, her voice trembling. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how you hurt her. Sylvester was stunned into silence. His mind reeled as he tried to comprehend what she was saying. What the hell are you talking about? What I did to Kimberly? You know what I'm talking about, Kelly said, her tone suddenly sharp. You slept with her. She told me everything. Sylvester's world spun. He stood up, pacing the small room, his hand pressed to his forehead as if it could stop the pounding inside. Kelly, that's insane. I never touched Kimberly. Where are you getting this? She told me, Sly. She told me you forced yourself on her years ago, before we got married. I confronted her about it a few months ago, and that's when everything started to change. I couldn't look at you the same way. Sylvester's breath caught in his throat, anger bubbling up inside him. That's a lie, Kelly. I never did anything to Kimberly. She's lying to you. She wouldn't lie about something like this, Kelly shouted, her voice breaking with emotion. Why would she? Why would my sister make something like that up? Because she's jealous of us, Sylvester fired back. You know how she's always been. She can't stand that we're happy, that we have a family. She's trying to tear us apart, and you're letting her. No, Sly, Kelly said, her voice shaking with conviction. I did what I did because I couldn't live with what you did. I couldn't stand it. I needed to get back at you. Sylvester's head spun with disbelief. He couldn't fathom that this was happening, that his marriage, his life, was being ripped apart by something so absurd, so wrong. I never touched your sister, he said, his voice deadly calm. And you destroyed our family over a lie. You expect me to believe that? Kelly sobbed. You expect me to believe you after everything? Yes, Sylvester shouted, his voice cracking. Because it's the truth, Kelly. I've never lied to you. Not about this, not about anything. There was another long silence on the other end. Sylvester could hear Kelly's quiet sobs, the weight of her guilt pressing down on both of them. I didn't know what else to do, Kelly whispered finally. I was so angry, and I couldn't talk to you about it. I couldn't look at you without thinking about what she said. So instead, you ran to Todd, Sylvester said bitterly. Instead of talking to me, you had an affair. You destroyed us. I made a mistake, Kelly choked. I know I did. I didn't know what to do. Sylvester sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to feel anymore. The betrayal was too deep, the lies too tangled. I don't even know who you are anymore, he whispered, more to himself than to her. I'm still the same person, Sly, Kelly said desperately. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I still love you. I didn't want to lose you. Sylvester laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. You already did, Kelly. The moment you decided to believe your sister over me, you lost me. There was a long silence on the other end. When Kelly finally spoke, her voice was broken and small. Is there any way we can fix this? Can you ever forgive me? Sylvester closed his eyes, the weight of the question pressing down on him. Could he? Could he ever look at her the same way again after what she had done? After she had believed the worst of him? I don't know, he said quietly. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Kelly let out a shaky breath, and Sylvester could hear the devastation in her voice. I'm sorry, Sly. I'm so sorry. But her words, her apologies, felt empty now. The damage had been done, and no amount of regret could undo the betrayal. I'm leaving, Sylvester said, standing up and grabbing his suitcase. I'll figure out how to see the kids, but as for us, I can't do this anymore. Kelly sobbed into the phone. Please don't go. We can fix this. We can try. But Sylvester had already made up his mind. Goodbye, Kelly. And with that, he hung up, the sound of her sobs echoing in his mind as he walked out of the motel, leaving the shattered pieces of their life behind. Sylvester's world was in pieces, scattered like shards of glass across the floor, impossible to piece back together. He had left Kelly, walked out of the house, and checked into a cheap motel, but nothing felt real. It was as if he was drifting through a fog, his mind too numb to fully grasp the gravity of what had just happened. Days passed in a blur. He barely slept, his thoughts constantly racing. Images of Kelly with Todd, her betrayal, her sobbing voice on the phone, all of it haunting him like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He couldn't shake the feeling of loss, as though everything he had built, everything he had worked for, had crumbled overnight. Sylvester sat in the corner of the motel room, staring blankly at the TV. The sound was on, but he wasn't watching. He hadn't been watching anything for hours. His phone buzzed beside him, another message from Kelly. She had been texting him every day, pleading for forgiveness, but each message felt like another blow, another reminder of how deep her betrayal had cut. He picked up the phone, finally reading her latest message. Sly, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, for the kids, let's talk. We can't end like this. I still love you. Sylvester felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. Love? How could she claim to love him after everything she had done? How could love survive something like this? He wanted to ignore it, throw the phone away, but instead, his thumb hovered over her contact, and before he could stop himself, he pressed call. Kelly picked up immediately, her voice small and hesitant. Sly? Yeah, it's me, Sylvester replied, his voice low and rough from the sleepless nights. There was a pause on the other end, the tension palpable even through the phone. I didn't think you'd call, Kelly said quietly. I wasn't sure if you'd ever want to talk to me again. Sylvester leaned back against the headboard, closing his eyes. I didn't want to, he admitted, but I need answers. Kelly sighed deeply, her breath shaky. I'll answer anything. Whatever you need to know, Sly, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. How long has it been going on? Sylvester asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. There was another pause, and he could hear Kelly's quiet sobs as she gathered the strength to answer. A few months. I'm not even sure when it started. It just happened. Sylvester's hands tightened into fists, the words slicing through him. A few months, he repeated bitterly. So, all this time you were lying to me. You were letting me look like a fool while you... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The thought was too painful. I never wanted to hurt you, Kelly said, her voice cracking. I swear to God, Sly, I wasn't thinking. I was so confused, so angry, and when Kimberly told me what you did, I didn't know how to handle it. Because I didn't do it, Sylvester shouted, his frustration boiling over. How many times do I have to tell you, Kelly? I never touched your sister. She made it up because she's jealous. You believed her over me. I know that now, Kelly said softly. I know I should have trusted you, but at the time, it felt so real. She was my sister and I... Her voice trailed off, full of regret. Sylvester shook his head, trying to process it all. You destroyed everything, Kelly. Our marriage, our family. You threw it all away because of a lie. I didn't mean for it to get this far, Kelly whispered. I didn't think it would... I never thought I'd lose you. You didn't think? Sylvester's voice was bitter and hard. You didn't think about what you were doing while you were sneaking around with Todd. You didn't think about our kids, our life? Or did none of that matter to you? It mattered, Kelly cried. It always mattered. I was just so angry, so lost in the pain, I couldn't see clearly. I know that now, but it's too late, isn't it? Sylvester didn't answer right away. The silence hung heavy between them. I don't know, he finally said. I don't know if it's too late or not, but right now I can't look at you without seeing what you did. Kelly's sobs grew louder, her guilt spilling through the phone. I'll do anything to make this right, Sly. I'll go to counseling, I'll cut ties with Todd, anything. Please, just give me a chance. I don't want to lose you. Sylvester felt his chest tighten, his anger and hurt warring with the memories of the life they had built together. The thought of their kids, Kyle and Kayla, brought a new layer of pain. They deserved better than this, better than a broken home. We need time apart, Sylvester said firmly, his voice steady. I can't come back, not right now. I need to figure out what to do, and I can't do that with you trying to pull me back. What about the kids? Kelly asked, her voice barely a whisper. They miss you. They keep asking when you're coming home. Sylvester's heart ached at the thought of his children, and he swallowed hard. I'll see them. I'll figure out something. But I'm not coming back to the house. Not yet. Please don't leave me, Kelly begged. I don't know how to do this without you. You should have thought about that before, Sylvester said coldly. Before you threw everything away. The weight of the conversation pressed down on him like a lead blanket. He had loved Kelly, still did in some deep part of his heart, but love wasn't enough to fix this. The betrayal, the lies, the trust that had been shattered. It was all too much. I have to go, Sylvester said, his voice breaking. We'll talk about the kids later. Kelly's sobs were the last thing he heard before he hung up. He stared at the phone in his hand, his mind swirling in a storm of emotions. He had walked out of his life, and now, standing at the edge of a precipice, Sylvester realized there was no easy way to put the pieces back together. The break had been too deep, the damage too severe. He was losing everything, and all he could do now was try to figure out how to pick up the pieces of himself. A week later, Sylvester found himself sitting in his lawyer's office. The sterile, impersonal room felt oppressive, and the scent of stale coffee lingered in the air. His lawyer, Mr. Benson, a no-nonsense man with graying hair and sharp eyes, sat across from him, flipping through papers. So, Benson said, looking up, you want to proceed with the separation? Sylvester nodded, his stomach twisting at the reality of it. Yeah, I need space. We need to figure out custody for the kids. Benson leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. Well, we can file the paperwork and get the ball rolling. It doesn't have to be permanent, but it'll give you the space you need. Sylvester stared at the papers on the desk, his heart heavy. It wasn't supposed to end like this. They were supposed to be a family, together forever. But now forever seemed like a distant dream, shattered by betrayal. I never thought it would come to this, Sylvester muttered, more to himself than to Benson. Benson gave him a sympathetic look. Nobody ever does, Sylvester. But sometimes things fall apart. All we can do is try to rebuild. Sylvester nodded, his mind numb as he signed the separation papers. The finality of it sank in as the ink dried on the page. As he left the lawyer's office, the weight of everything felt unbearable. His marriage was over, his family broken, and now all he could do was face the reality of what was left. As he walked to his car, he glanced up at the sky, clouds hanging low and heavy with rain. It felt fitting. His life had been caught in a storm, and there was no telling when the clouds would clear. All he knew was that he had to find a way to move forward, even if it meant leaving everything behind. Weeks had passed since Sylvester signed the separation papers. The initial shock had dulled into a deep, aching sadness. But life, as it always does, kept moving forward. He had rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town, just enough space for him to live quietly and for his kids to stay over on the weekends. It was a far cry from the home he had shared with Kelly, but it was peaceful, and that was what he needed. Most days were spent in a routine that felt more like survival than living. Sylvester would go to work, come home, and sit in the quiet of his apartment staring at the walls. The pain of losing his family was still raw, but now it felt like a slow burn, a constant presence rather than a sharp stab. His only real source of comfort came from his kids, Kyle and Kayla. When they stayed with him, they brought a small sense of normalcy back into his life, though it was clear they were still confused by what had happened. One Friday evening, Sylvester was getting the apartment ready for the kids' arrival when there was a knock at the door. Expecting it to be Kelly dropping them off, he opened the door to see a familiar face, Olivia, the lawyer who had handled the initial discussions with Kelly's legal team. Olivia stood there, her briefcase in hand, her expression soft but professional. "Sylvester, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to check in on you. Can I come in?" Sylvester blinked in surprise but nodded, stepping aside to let her in. Yeah, sure, come on in." She walked into the apartment, glancing around at the modest setup. It wasn't much, but Sylvester had made it his own. The walls were bare, save for a few framed pictures of the kids, and the furniture was simple, functional, but far from luxurious. "I was just about to get dinner ready for the kids," Sylvester said, motioning toward the kitchen. "They're staying with me this weekend." Olivia smiled warmly. "That's great to hear. How are they holding up?" Sylvester shrugged, feeling the familiar weight in his chest. "They're doing okay, I guess. I try to keep things normal for them, but it's hard. They keep asking when I'm coming home." Olivia nodded, her eyes sympathetic. "That's always the hardest part, trying to protect them from the mess of it all. But you're doing the best you can, and that's what matters." Sylvester gestured toward the couch. "Do you want to sit down? Can I get you something to drink?" Olivia waved a hand. "No, I'm fine. I just wanted to stop by and see how you were doing, now that the dust has settled a bit." He sat down across from her, feeling a little awkward. Olivia had been a steady presence during the legal process, guiding him through the emotional turmoil with a calm, professional demeanor. But outside the office, it was strange seeing her in a more personal setting. "I'm managing," Sylvester said, his voice flat. "Some days are better than others." Olivia studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "I know this isn't easy, but you're doing better than most. A lot of people don't even try to move forward. They get stuck in the past." "I don't feel like I'm moving forward," Sylvester admitted, leaning back on the couch. "Most days I'm just trying to get through without falling apart." Olivia's gaze softened and she leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "It takes time, Sylvester. You're grieving the loss of your marriage, and that's not something you can rush through. But you're here. You're taking care of your kids. That's progress." Sylvester let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what progress looks like anymore. I thought I had it all figured out, you know? A wife, kids, a life. Now, I don't even know what the future holds." Olivia smiled gently. "None of us do. But that's the thing about life. It surprises you. Just because this chapter didn't end the way you wanted doesn't mean the story's over. There's still so much ahead." Sylvester looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes catching him off guard. He hadn't expected this conversation to feel so personal, so real. It was like she saw right through the walls he had built around himself. "I guess you've seen a lot of people go through this," Sylvester said, his voice quieter now. How do they make it out the other side? Olivia tilted her head thoughtfully. Everyone's journey is different, but the ones who make it are the ones who let themselves heal, who don't rush it. They learn to forgive, not just the people who hurt them, but themselves too. They rebuild, slowly but surely, and they find a new way forward. Sylvester stared at the floor, her words sinking in. Forgiveness. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that yet. But the idea of rebuilding, of finding a new way forward, maybe there was hope in that. He looked up at her, something shifting inside him. You're really good at this, you know that? Olivia smiled, a small blush creeping into her cheeks. I've been doing it long enough. I've learned how to read people. Sylvester chuckled softly. I bet. You probably see right through me, huh? She met his eyes, her smile fading slightly. You're not as hard to read as you think, Sylvester. You're hurt, and you're angry, but you still care deeply about the people in your life. That's why you'll get through this. He nodded, the words resonating with him more than he expected. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sliver of light break through the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to move forward after all. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation lingering in the air. You know, Olivia said suddenly, breaking the silence, if you ever need someone to talk to, outside of all this legal stuff, I'm here. It doesn't have to be formal. Sylvester looked at her, surprised by the offer. There was something genuine in her eyes, something that made him feel seen, understood. It was different from the way he'd been dealing with people lately, all surface-level conversations about logistics and custody. This was deeper, more real. Thanks, he said, his voice soft. I might take you up on that. Olivia stood up, smoothing out her skirt. I should get going. But seriously, don't hesitate to reach out. You've got more support than you think. As she walked to the door, Sylvester followed, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. Just as she was about to leave, he stopped her. Olivia, he called out, and she turned to face him. Yeah? I really appreciate you checking in, he said, his voice sincere. It means a lot. She smiled warmly, her eyes kind. You're welcome, Sylvester. Take care of yourself, and the kids. With that, she left, and Sylvester stood in the doorway, watching her go. For the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. As he closed the door behind him, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as broken as he thought. Maybe with time he could start picking up the pieces of his life and find a way forward. And maybe he didn't have to do it alone. It was a cool Saturday morning, and the air was crisp with the promise of autumn. Sylvester found himself in a small coffee shop on the corner of Main Street, a place he had passed by countless times but had never entered. Today, though, he had a reason to be here. He sat by the window, nursing a steaming cup of coffee, watching people pass by outside. There was a sense of calm in the air, a feeling that was new to him after the emotional storm he had been living through for the past few months. Across from him, Olivia sat, casually sipping her own coffee. She was dressed more casually than he was used to seeing her, jeans and a simple sweater, and it made her seem even more approachable. The formal walls that had once defined their relationship were gone, and now they were just two people having a conversation. So, how are the kids? Olivia asked, her eyes warm and genuine. Sylvester smiled softly. They're good. Really good, actually. I think they're finally starting to adjust to everything. Kayla's been asking about playing soccer again, and Kyle's really into building model planes lately. It's nice to see them excited about something. Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's great to hear. I know this has been hard on them, but it sounds like you're doing an amazing job keeping things stable for them. Sylvester let out a small chuckle. I'm just trying not to mess it up. Half the time I feel like I'm winging it. Olivia smiled. Aren't we all? That's parenting from what I hear. You're doing better than you give yourself credit for. There was a pause as they both took a moment to sip their coffee. The silence between them wasn't awkward, though. It was comfortable, like an unspoken understanding. Over the past few weeks, Sylvester had begun to look forward to these small moments with Olivia. She had become a steady presence in his life, someone he could talk to without judgment or expectations. "I don't think I could have gotten through all this without your help," Sylvester admitted, his voice quieter now. "I mean it. You've been a real rock for me, and I don't know how to thank you." Olivia's gaze softened, and she placed her coffee cup down. "You don't have to thank me, Sylvester. I was just doing what anyone would do." "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "It's more than that. You didn't have to go out of your way to check on me, to be there for me. But you did. And it's made a difference." She smiled, a small blush creeping into her cheeks. "I guess I just didn't want to see you go through this alone. You're a good man, and I've seen too many people let this kind of pain destroy them. I didn't want that to happen to you." There was a sincerity in her words that hit Sylvester deeply. He had spent so long feeling like his life was unraveling, like the world he had built was crumbling beyond repair. But here, sitting with Olivia, he felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be okay again. "Things are starting to feel different," Sylvester said slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "Not just with the kids, but with me. Like I'm finally moving past everything." "That's a good sign," Olivia replied, her voice soft. "You're healing, Sylvester, and it's okay to feel hopeful again. You deserve that." He smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through him. For the first time in a long time, he believed her. The pain of Kelly's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined him. He was starting to see a future, one that wasn't clouded by the past. "Have you heard from Kelly?" Olivia asked gently, her tone cautious. Sylvester nodded. "Yeah, a few times. She's been reaching out, asking if we could talk. But I haven't responded much. I'm not ready for that conversation, and I don't know if I ever will be." Olivia looked at him carefully. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive her?" Sylvester thought about it for a moment, letting the question hang in the air. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't think forgiveness is something you can force. I might get there one day, but right now, I'm focused on moving forward. I can't keep living in that space, you know? I need to build something new." Olivia nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "That makes sense. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It's about finding peace for yourself. And that takes time." Sylvester leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting out the window. "Yeah, peace. I think I'm starting to find that." They sat quietly for a while, the hum of the coffee shop filling the space between them. It wasn't until Olivia broke the silence that Sylvester realized something had shifted. "You know, I've really enjoyed spending time with you," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes revealing more. Sylvester looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her words. "I've enjoyed it too." There was a pause, a moment of unspoken connection passing between them. Sylvester hadn't expected to feel this way, not so soon after everything that had happened, but there was no denying it. Olivia had become more than just a friend or a helping hand. She had become someone he looked forward to seeing, someone who brought light back into his life. "I don't know what this is," Sylvester said carefully, his voice steady but unsure. "But I like where it's going." Olivia smiled, her eyes sparkling with a warmth that made his heart beat a little faster. "Me too." Sylvester felt a rush of emotions he hadn't expected. Hope, excitement, and maybe even the first flicker of something more. It wasn't complicated or overwhelming. It was simple. It was right. "I don't want to rush anything," he added quickly, feeling the need to clarify. "But I think there's something here, Olivia. Something good." Olivia nodded, her smile softening. "We'll take it slow. I'm not in a hurry either. But I think you're right, Sylvester. There is something here, and I think it could be really good." They both smiled, the weight of their pasts still present, but no longer as heavy. It wasn't about moving too fast or trying to fill the void left by the pain. It was about starting fresh, about new beginnings. As they finished their coffee, Sylvester felt lighter than he had in months. The sun was breaking through the clouds outside, casting a warm glow over the street. It felt like a sign that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind him. And for the first time in a long time, Sylvester allowed himself to believe in something better. As they stood to leave, Olivia turned to him with a playful grin. "So, what's next for us?" Sylvester chuckled, his heart light. "I'm not sure, but whatever it is, I think it'll be good." She nodded, and together they stepped out into the bright, crisp morning, the world wide open before them. For Sylvester, this wasn't just the start of something new. It was the beginning of a life rebuilt, a heart healed, and a future full of possibilities he hadn't dared to dream of just months before. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready. The day was bright and crisp, with the first hints of spring in the air. The last few months had been a journey for Sylvester, one of healing, self-discovery, and most unexpectedly, love. He had come a long way from the man who had sat in that empty motel room, shattered by betrayal. Now, standing in his small but cozy apartment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The doorbell rang, and Sylvester's heart lifted. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and opened the door to see Olivia standing there, looking radiant in a simple dress. She smiled when she saw him, and he couldn't help but smile back. "Hey," he said softly, stepping aside to let her in. "Hey yourself," Olivia replied, stepping inside and giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. "Smells good in here. What are you cooking?" "Just some pasta for dinner," Sylvester said, closing the door behind her. "The kids are excited. Kyle wants to show you the new model plane he built, and Kayla's been working on some artwork for your office." Olivia's eyes softened, and she laughed lightly. "I can't wait. They're so sweet." Sylvester led her into the living room, where Kyle and Kayla were already waiting. The kids immediately rushed over to Olivia, their faces lighting up when they saw her. "Aunt Olivia!" Kayla exclaimed, hugging her tightly. "Come see my drawing!" Olivia knelt down, smiling warmly. "Of course, sweetie. I can't wait to see it." Kyle hovered nearby, holding the model airplane he had been working on for weeks. "And I want to show you this, too. It's a B-17 bomber. Took me forever to get the wings right." Sylvester watched as Olivia engaged with the kids, her warmth and kindness filling the room. She had effortlessly become a part of their lives, someone they looked up to and loved. It was amazing how natural it all felt, how seamlessly she fit into the life Sylvester was rebuilding. After a while, the kids went back to their activities, leaving Sylvester and Olivia to sit on the couch together, a glass of wine in each of their hands. The evening sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a soft glow over the room. "This feels good," Sylvester said, leaning back and looking at her. "Like things are finally coming together." Olivia smiled and rested her hand on his arm. "It does, doesn't it? I'm so proud of you, Sylvester. You've come a long way." Sylvester nodded, thinking back to everything that had happened, the pain, the heartbreak, the struggle to find himself again. It had been hard, harder than he had ever imagined. But now, sitting here with Olivia, he realized that the journey had been worth it. "I never thought I'd get here," Sylvester admitted, his voice quiet. "After everything with Kelly, I didn't think I could ever trust anyone again. But you've changed that for me." Olivia's eyes softened and she placed her glass on the table, turning toward him. "You've done the work, Sylvester. You've allowed yourself to heal. I'm just happy I could be part of your life during that process." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You're more than just a part of it, Olivia. You've been my anchor through all of this, and I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." Olivia's breath caught, her gaze searching his. "I don't want to imagine mine without you either," Sylvester squeezed her hand, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. It was a moment of clarity for him, a realization that after all the pain and brokenness, he had found something real, something worth holding on to. "I love you," Sylvester said softly, his voice steady and full of meaning. Olivia blinked, tears welling up in her eyes as a smile spread across her face. "I love you too, Sylvester." They sat in the warmth of that moment, the world outside fading away. This was what redemption felt like, coming out of the darkest times and finding light, finding love in a place he never expected. "I've been thinking," Sylvester said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About us. About the future." Olivia raised an eyebrow, her smile teasing. "Oh? And what have you been thinking?" Sylvester chuckled, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling up inside him. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time for us to take the next step. I mean, the kids already adore you, and we spend most of our time together. It feels right, don't you think?" Olivia's eyes widened slightly, and her smile grew. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Sylvester took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yeah, I think I am." He stood up, walking to the small drawer by the kitchen and pulling out a small box he had been keeping there for the past week. Returning to the living room, he knelt down in front of Olivia, her eyes now shimmering with emotion. "Olivia," Sylvester began, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I never thought I'd be able to love again, not after everything that happened. But you showed me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. You've been my partner, my confidant, and my biggest support. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and I want you to be part of this family. For real." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant engagement ring. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Will you marry me?" Sylvester asked, his heart full of hope and love. Olivia let out a soft sob of happiness, nodding as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Yes, yes, Sylvester, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced, the moment feeling like the culmination of everything they had been through. It wasn't just a proposal. It was a promise of a new life, of redemption, of a love that had been forged in the hardest of times and come out stronger on the other side. As they held each other, Sylvester felt the weight of his past finally lift. The pain of Kelly's betrayal, the heartbreak, the doubt, it all faded into the background. What mattered now was the life ahead of him, the love he had found in Olivia, and the family they were building together. The kids burst into the room, having overheard the excitement, and Kyle was the first to speak. "Did she say yes?" Sylvester looked at Olivia, her face still glowing with happiness, and smiled. "Yeah, buddy," she said yes. Kayla rushed to Olivia, hugging her tight. "Does that mean you're going to be our stepmom?" Olivia laughed through her tears, nodding. "It does, sweetie. I'm going to be with you guys for good." The joy in the room was palpable, and as they all hugged and laughed together, Sylvester realized something. This was his redemption. This was his new beginning. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about finding peace with it. It was about learning to trust, to love, and to build again, even when everything had seemed lost. And as Sylvester stood there with Olivia and his kids, he knew he had finally found his way home. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If today's story resonated with you, or if you've experienced similar challenges in your relationships, remember you're not alone. We hope this video offers some insight or comfort as you navigate your own path forward. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We value your perspectives and would love to hear your stories too. Join us next time for another profound exploration of the heart's resilience. Until then, take care and keep seeking your truth.